Okay, welcome to the second part of the Hogwarts on Rails tutorial. I've got about 6 things that I want to cover off for today. We're going to start by reviewing the application where we left off. And if we head over to the browser here, we can see that last time we had created models for houses and students and teachers, and along with that we had created a seed script to populate the associated database tables with data, and we had created a controller for houses, and that's what we're seeing right here. This is a list of the entries in the houses table. House has a name and a certain number of points, and this is the index action of the houses controller that's showing us this information. And if I click on any one of these houses, I go to the show for the particular house here. This is house 22, so a house with a primary key of 22, and you can see the name of the house, the number of points, and the number of students that are associated with that house. If we go back over to the application, you'll remember that, look at our schema here. In the database, we have our houses table, a students table, and a teachers table, and then there was a foreign key on teachers and students that relates them back to houses. So there's a one-to-many association between houses and students and houses and teachers. And here's was this seed script where we were able to create fake data using the faker gem for our houses and then associate students and teachers with those houses. Last but not least, we can see that we had a controller set up, as I mentioned, for houses, where we were fetching all of the houses for the index and a single house by primary key coming from the params hash by way of the route, and that would load up a single house for display inside of the associated view. And the routing file for all of this in the config folder looks like this. We have our resources command that would set up our 7 RESTful routes, but we're only asking for an index and show route. And how that is going to work is that's going to create a get request to /houses will load up the index, and a get request to /houses/some ID will load up the show. So I'll get rid of this for now, and we can continue on. So I want to create a bit of a modification to how the show page is functioning right now for houses. Currently, we're just displaying the number of points and the number of students. What I'd like to add is I'd like to actually list out the teachers and the students. So close some of these things here. Open up the controller. So in the show, we are loading up the house in question and assigning that to the instance variable @house, and that instance variable will get shared with the associated view. And so to display the teachers, I'll put an H3 here and I'll say teachers, and I'll close that. And then I'm going to use an ERB tag, and we go to the house, go to its associated teachers, and loop over each of them, grabbing the teacher. And inside of here, I will drop an LI for each one of the teachers, and I will output the teacher's name, and I'll wrap this whole thing in a UL, right like that, and indent that. Okay, so I'll flip over to the web. I'm just checking to see if everything looks good here. Reload that. You can see here, these are the associated teachers. Eventually, it might be nice to have these be links when we create a teachers controller to go to the show for each one of these teachers. And then I can do the same thing I just did here for students. H3, UL, say house, go to the associated students, move over H1, take the student, N for that, and a close to the UL. And then inside of here, we have our LI, and we echo out the student's name. And then close up that LI. Back to our web page. If I reload the page, we can see now we have teachers and students. Okay, so that's all I wanted to add to the show page there. We'll return to that to make these links when we have controllers for teachers and students. So I'll do a git add, git commit, a list of teachers and students to the houses show action. Okay, close that down there. As I said, I want to, next thing up, create a controller for teachers and students with a index and a show action. We'll start with teachers. And so I'm going to do this from the terminal here. We are going to use Rails G for Rails generate. We're generating a controller. And what controller are we generating? One for teachers. And I know up front that I want an index action and a show action. So I can ask for those and we'll get stubs for the actions in the teachers controller, and we'll get a index and show view in the teachers view folder. So that gets created. I can go take if you look at some of the things that were created, remember, we can always come back to this diagram here when we're implementing a new sort of user portion of our web page, something that the user is going to interface with by clicking on links or even entering URLs. We need some aspect of routing. We need a controller, which we just generated. That controller is going to, in most cases, communicate with a model to retrieve data from the database. It'll save that data into an instance variable so that an associated view can make use of that data, and then that view will be put into sort of an overarching HTML layout, and that will be returned to the requesting browser. So let's pull up the new teachers controller. You can see here we have the index and the show action. What I would like is I'd like this controller, I'll just put a comment here as to what I would like, is that a get request to /teachers is what's going to load that up, and a get request to /teachers /some ID will load up the show. How do we make that a reality? Well, we do that inside of the routing file, which is in our config folder. These two routes were placed here when we generated the teachers controller, and we don't actually want those, so I'm going to delete those two. And then I'm going to use the resources command to ask for the RESTful routes for teachers. Again, I only want the index and the show routes out of all of those 7 RESTful routes. That sets up what I was asking for here, a route for /teachers and a route for /teachers /ID. If you ever want to know what your application routes are, you can get them in a few ways. At the terminal, you can run the Rails routes command, and that will display what your routes are. They're often a little bit hard to read at the terminal because they sort of wrap around. And so another way of displaying those is to go up here. You can either put a route that doesn't exist, and as part of the error message, you get to see the routes that are present in your website. Or you can say Rails/info, and that will load up all of the routes that belong to your application. So you can see here, these are the 2 routes that we just added. The teacher's path and the teacher path. A get request to /teachers and a get request to /teachers /some ID. Okay, next up, we want to implement the actions in each one of these things. For teachers, we want to create a teachers variable. The name of that doesn't matter, just sort of that's what we're loading up, so we might as well call it teachers plural. And then here I'm going to go to the teacher model. I'm going to get all of them, but I also want to order it by name. So I'll just say order by name. And then here we want to get a single teacher, and we want to make use of the ID that's in the associated route. So again, the naming of this variable isn't important, but sort of the convention is that we name it after what we're actually loading, and in this case it's a single teacher, so that's what the variable is going to be called. We're going to use the find command that finds a teacher by primary key. I could just hard code it into primary key if I knew a specific number just for testing purposes. But as I said, we can also just pull this ID directly from the route. We do so by going to the params hash. The params is where all of our get and post parameters end up. In this case, I'm going to ask for the ID. With those two things in place, I can now hop over to the views. I've got a teacher's views folder right here, and I've got an index and a show. So in the index here, I'm going to replace the contents, put an H2 and say all teachers. My view has access to the instance variables that were loaded up in its associated controller action, right? So for the index view, I have access to this @teachers variable. And so I'm going to go to that @teachers variable, and I'm going to loop over each teacher. And then I need an associated end. And then I will echo out each teacher's name. And I will say each teacher belongs to house, and then I will open up the teacher's house name like so. Close that sentence. Got an extra tag there. Put all of this into an unordered list and indent that over. Okay, so this should now be accessible at /teachers. There's all my teachers ordered by their names, which house they belong to. Oh, that needs to be a UL, not an LI. And since I am going to be implementing the show for each of these teachers, I can make this right here, the display of the name, also a link. So I can say link to. The first argument is going to be what the link text will be. And the second argument is what we want to link to. In this case, it is the teacher. And then link to will go to the routing system and see if the routing system knows how to route to a teacher. And it does, because we have a resource for teachers and we've asked for a show. And so it'll link to that show for us. So I can go back over here, reload my page, and those all become links. I can click on any one of them. The view hasn't yet been implemented, but the controller action has. That's here where we're loading up a particular teacher by ID. So we just need to implement the view now. And I will do it like this. I'll say all students. Oh, sorry, no. This is for a single teacher. So I will say, I'll use that teacher's name. I will echo out the teacher's name. And then close this H2. This teacher belongs. Oh, maybe I'll say something like there are here I will go to the teacher and then to their house, and then to the other teachers and ask for the size So that'll get how many other teachers there are in the same house. There are this many other teachers in house. And then this will be, I can go get the house from there, equals teacher.house.name. So that is a paragraph. So I can say teacher of house at teacher.house.name. Just making use of a little bit of the associated information. So there we are. And there are 4 other teachers in that same house. And now we've implemented 2 controller actions within our new teachers controller. Any one of these gives me a link, which I can link over to a show page for that particular teacher. Before I go and implement a menu that'll allow me to navigate between all of the different controllers that we have in our system, I'd like you to take a moment and think about what I did to create this teacher's controller and implement the correct routes, the correct controller actions, and the correct views, and then take a moment to pause this video and try to implement the same thing for students. And so you can pause right now, implement that up, come back. I'm going to pause this video as well, and I will implement students sort of behind the scenes. So when I come back from the pause, the students controller will also be implemented. And we're back from the pause. And what you can see is that I now have a students controller. It's listing all of my students and the houses they belong to. I can click on any one of the students and I can see some information about the students. Same thing goes for what we had before, the teacher's controller, although while I was paused, I also added a link for the individual houses. And the last thing I did was over on the houses controller. When you view any of the houses, the list of teachers and students that we added earlier in this video, they are now links as well to the teachers or the students that belong to that particular house. So how was that done? Well, I won't go over the whole implementation of the students. You'll be able to see that in the GitHub repository. It's very similar to what you just saw me do for teachers. But if we go over to the houses show, you can see where we had added that unordered list for both teachers and students. Inside of the LIs, we're now linking to, with the teacher name, we're linking to the teacher, linking to student name, and linking to the student. Okay, in our list of things here, what I wanted to implement next, or at least demonstrate, was what's called eager loading of model associations. And before I demonstrate that, I want to show the reason why we would want to do this. And the reason why we would want to do this is to solve what are called this is the solution to m plus 1 problems. So you may have heard people refer to this type of problem happening in a web application. It's often applications that are backed by databases, and it usually creeps in when you have something like Active Records, some kind of ORM that's pulling your data for you. And I'm going to give a demonstration of when this kind of n+1 database querying problem can occur and how to solve the problem. And so I'm going to load up the students index action as well as the controller. So it's in this index where I load up a list of all students and I save it into this @students variable. That's going to, Active Record won't fire off this query right away. Active Record is lazy about when it's going to actually fire things off to the database. So this will return as an Active Record relation here, and that'll be handed off to the view. But then here inside of the view, when we go to .each, we're requesting to loop through all the students. So now Active Record is going to need to go to the database and find all of those students. It's going to do a select star on the students table. That's all well and good. The problem crops in when within this loop, we are also requesting the student's house name and a link to the student house. So that's happening right here. This is where we're listing all the students and their house names. Well, the house names aren't stored with the student, just a primary key to the houses table, right? We have that house ID, sorry, not a primary key. There's a foreign key in the students table to the house table or houses table. That's one of the things with Rails. You have to get the singularization and the pluralization correct. So let me just pull up the schema so I can show you what I'm talking about here. That's in the DB folder. Here with students, we have that house ID. That's our foreign key. The house and its name is stored in a separate database table. So why is that a problem? Well, that's a problem because we said at this point on line 4 is when the select star is going to fire off to fetch all the students. And then here, when we go to display a particular student, we need the student's house, which means we need to do another query into a separate database table, into the houses table. And we're going to end up firing off a separate query each time we go through this loop. And so if there are n students, then we've made one request when we wanted all of them, and then n more to the houses table, one for every house associated with the particular student. We can see this in action if we go back to the console where the Rails server is running. I've just loaded up this students index where we said this problem is present, and you can see here this flurry of SQL requests that were fired off when we requested that page. We scroll all the way up to the top. You can see here's where the first select star to students was. And then as we're looping through each student, we're finding each student's house one by one by one by one. Not a very efficient way to go about hitting the database. There is, however, an easy solution to this. So although this is a criticism often leveled at frameworks like Rails that they lead to n+1 problems, if you recognize that the problem is present, if you recognize in your code that you are within a loop making access to an associated database table, we can solve this problem when we make this request right here. So, right here. When we make this request right here to the student table, I can just ask it to say this should includes, or this query includes student's house. That's house singular because that's the relationship here. Every student belongs to a single house. And so now when we make this query, the query includes the house, and it's still ordered by name. So if I go back to looking at, remember what was done last time, all those queries to the houses table, I'm going to reload this page. And all of that now is boiled down to just 2 queries. So we have a select statement to find all the students, and then a single select statement to find all the houses, and it's specifically looking for houses where the IDs related to the foreign keys that were from the students that were selected up here. So it's a much more efficient way to be working with the database. And we can do this in any situation where we might need related data. So even here, this show, if we look at the show for the student, it's making access to the related house. So we could do the same thing. We can say includes house. And we could go over to teacher's controller and we could do the same. We could say, well, here we have, oops, triggered something funny with VS Code there. This is going to be an includes statement, house, and includes house. And last but not least, if we're over on the houses controller, within the show, we're accessing both teachers and students, right? And so I'll reload this page again. You can see what's triggered when that gets loaded. It fires off 4 different SQL requests for these various things. If I go to the houses controller though, and I say for that show action, the query includes students, plural, because a house has many students, and teachers, plural, because a house has many teachers. Reload the page again, and we're now down. It didn't optimize it as much. It wasn't quite an n+1 on this page, but we have gone from 4 queries down to 3. So not a huge savings within the house, but it was a pretty big deal over on the student controller when we had an actual n+1 issue happening on the show, and same thing in the show for the teachers. Okay, let's close some of these tabs down and see what we wanted to get to next here. So next up is a little bit of a menu. I've been doing some manual navigation between the various controllers by using the location bar up here, which is fine for debugging purposes, but it's not something we would ever want our users to have to do. And so I'd like a simple menu up at the top of the screen here to navigate between the home page, which shows houses, the index page of the students controller, and the index page of the teacher's controller. And so that is going to happen. I want that to be present on all pages. And if we think about our overview here, we remember that every view gets injected into an overarching layout. And that's in the view layouts application.html.erb. That's where that overarching layout is. In the first video, we saw that I put, welcome to Hogwarts inside of an H1, a little footer message. That's why this and this are present on every page that we navigate to. I'm going to add a little bit here. I'm going to say, well, we have a full header now. And as part of that header, those funny things, I'm going to create a nav. And for now, it's just going to be a simple unordered list with a few LIs in it. We can style it up at a later date, but for now, we'll put a few link to statements inside of here. So we'll say link to home, and we'll make this be the route path. How did I know to say route path here? I'll show you in a moment. I'll also say students here, students path, and link to teachers path. And let's try this out. I've got a home, a students, and a teachers. Click on the teachers link, or sorry, the students link, and I see all the students. Click on the teachers link, and I see all the teachers. This is taking me to the index action of those two things. And I click on the home, and it takes me home, which shows me all the houses. So again, how did I know to say route path, students path, and teachers path? Those are coming from the routing system. And so again, if I want to look up what routes I have, go to /rails/info, increase the font a little bit here. On the leftmost side here, we see a bunch of things that say _path beside them. And so this is how you reference a route within the link to command. Next to that is the HTTP verb that triggers the route and the URL that triggers the route. So we can see here students path. That is going to be taking us to the students index action, which is what we wanted. The teachers index action, well, that's the teachers path. And then to go to slash, or the root, which goes to the houses index action, that's the root path. So that's how I knew how to do these various things. Okay, it's been a while since I've done any source control. I probably should have committed before making all of those changes. I'm going to submit them all in one go here, though. Implemented the completed the students and teachers controllers in the menu. And then the last piece of what I wanted to demonstrate today was a little bit separate. So we've been working with the same data that we were working with from the first video, the teachers, the students, the houses. I want to add now a new piece of the puzzle, which is what I tend to call static or semi-static pages. So you can think of these things as pages that you might want to be editable in some way, and editable maybe by yourself or potentially by someone else or a client, and maybe even a non-technical client. So not something where you would want someone to have to go into your source code and edit html.erb files. You'd like maybe there to be some way for someone to, by way of the website, add or edit or update these kind of files. So you might have a file like an about page or a file like a contact page. And so we want a system for doing that. We want it to be password protected so that not anyone can go in and make these edits. And then we want some way of having a public way of permanently linking to these semi-static pages. So the example will be we'll build a about page for our website, maybe even a contact page after that. So we're going to do this by using scaffolding. Later on in this course, instead of using something like scaffolding, we might just create a model for this and then rely on, later in the course, we use a gem called ActiveAdmin to give us CRUD access by way of a password protected administrative dashboard. We don't have that at this point, so we'll just use scaffolding and we'll put a password onto that. So I'm going to say Rails generate, and scaffold I want to generate. I want a page model created for me, and each of these pages is going to have a title, which is going to be a string, some content, which will be text, and also a permalink that we can use in the URL, which will be a sort of a friendly way of referring to this page in the URL, friendlier than referring it to it by way of primary key, and that'll be a string as well. So there we are. I'll commit that to my GitHub repo, scaffolded pages. And then we need to bring the pages table into existence. So we do that with a Rails DB migrate that will run the migration that was created as part of that scaffold. That's great. We now have a pages controller where we can create a new page. And so I will have like about us. I'm going to do a search for Hogwarts here. And I'll just take this little blurb from Wikipedia and I will paste that into the content, and the permalink will be about-us, and I will create that. And there we are. We've created a page. It's sort of looks like an about page. It's not perfectly styled yet, or the way it's being displayed. And again, we don't want this to be open to the public at large. We don't want someone to be able to come in here and see an edit link. We definitely don't want someone to be able to edit or to be able to create new pages. So how do we create a simple password protection system here? Well, if we hop over to the Rails guides, there's an example of doing this in the Getting Started with Rails tutorial. Closer to the end, under security, is a way of dealing with what's called basic authentication. So this is like HTTP basic authentication. It's built into HTTP. This is when the browser will actually pop up a little modal asking for a username and password. And once that has been confirmed, the browser remembers that username and password, and you're sort of authenticated into that part of the application. So I'm going to take this here, this little snippet, and I'm going to go open up the pages controller that was generated as part of our scaffold. And I'm going to drop that in there, and it says HTTP basic authenticate with and a hard-coded username and password. So it's not necessarily the best or most perfect solution. We've got a hard-coded username and password here. You could add a little bit of an extra layer in that you could pull that from a database table. You could have a user model and a users table that you're pulling that from. But we're going to be fine, at least for now, with having this be hard-coded into our file. The name's going to be Wally. The password is going to be glutton. And if we head back over to our application and we try to get to that pages controller, oh, why didn't you work? Pages controller, authenticate with. Let me see. This might be because I had done this demo earlier with the same username and password, and the browser may still be remembering that. So what if I reverse these? Glutton and a password of Wally. Yeah, so that is going to work. So that's because I hadn't shut my browser down since I did the last implementation. The browser will remember that username and password until the session is over, until meaning you actually close all tabs down from that particular browser. So here we go to localhost. If I try to get to /pages, I get prompted for a username and password. Can't get past it. Put the wrong answer in, it doesn't let me by. If I cancel out, it tells me that my access was denied. If I go back in and I put the correct username and password, glutton and Wally in, it lets me in. I can do my creating of new pages, showing, editing, deleting, that kind of stuff. So now all of these pages are behind a password protected part of our website. We want to expose the pages themselves so that we can have our about page. The whole point was that we wanted to be able to have pages that people could see, and now we've made them hidden. So the way we're going to implement this is I'm actually going to add a new route. I'd like to be able to, from here, meaning the URL, and maybe even from this menu, being able to say something like permalink /about us. You can see that's already saved into my browser history there, and have that pull up the About Us page, where this is the permalink that I saved with the page. Here you go. And let's say we created a contact page. No, not an empty page, but a contact page. You can contact us using a magic spell. And then this will be the contact page. I'd like this contact page to be loadable by going to /permalink/contact. So this part of the URL is going to reference the permalink saved in the database table with the record that you want to display. So currently this route does not exist. I need to bring it into existence, and so we do that by way of the routes file. I don't need to do this by way of resources. We already have resources for page. Those are our password protected ones. So I'm just going to manually define a route. I would say a GET request to /permalink/ some placeholder, which is the actual permalink. I want that to route to the pages controller, and now I'm going to reference a action that doesn't yet exist called permalink. And maybe just to make this a little less complicated or a little more clear, because I'm using the word permalink in many different references here, maybe we'll make it so that instead of going to /permalink/something, we'll go to like /static/something. So /static/contact would load up the contact page, /static/about us would load up the about us page. And so I'll change my route to be /static. Anytime in a route we have a portion of the route that starts with a colon, that's a placeholder, and that can just be, anything. In some of our other examples, where we were working with the teachers and the students in the houses, the placeholder was the ID, and we pulled that out of the params hash. Here, the placeholder is the permalink that we want to pull up. Here, we're going to go to the pages table, and I'll call the action static, and I'll let this route be known as static, which means we can access this by static_path with link to. Okay, so in the pages controller, I need a new action. It's called static. That means I also need a new view. So I'll go to the pages controllers views, and I will create a static.html.erb. And here in static, I'm going to load up a page. I'm loading it by way of the page model, and I'm finding by the permalink column in the database table using data from our route that's going into our params hash, and specifically it's this placeholder right here, the permalink placeholder. And so params at position permalink is going to find the page. Then that page instance variable will be shared with this view, and I can display that page title. And then maybe within a paragraph tag, the page content. And now we should be able to go to /static/about us and see an about us page, and /static/contact and see a contact page. And we should be able to edit these pages by way of our password protected scaffolded pages controller. So you can contact us using a magic spell or by owl mail. and then I can update that page and get to it by way of static/contact. I can see that my update went through. If I want to add the about and the contact to my menu here, that's in the layout. I'm going to do that by adding a new li, link to about us, and that's going to be the static path. It's because we said as static here, so that the name of this route is static. Again, we could see this by looking at the Rails info for the routes, and we could see that we have a static path, which references a permalink placeholder. That was here. Unlike these other locations, though, the router system cannot build this route for us without a little bit of extra information, which is which page we actually want to route to. How would the router know how to fill out this placeholder? We have to provide it with what to fill in. And so we say, take me to the static path, but use a permalink of about us in that case. And then I can copy and paste that and change this to the contact page. Contact, have an extra quote there, and change this to contact. If I go back to any page in my application, my menu has grown by 2 entries. I can click About Us and see the About Us page. I can click Contact and see the Contact page. And I can continue to navigate around my application. And that is an implementation of semi-static pages. So we don't, to modify or add new semi-static pages, well, to add them, we have to do a little bit of wrangling here, right? We have to go and manually update that menu, but to edit them, we don't have to edit any of the source code. We can just do that all by way of our pages helper. There is an argument to be made that we could even generate a portion of this menu by looping through the contents of our pages table, dropping a link for each one of the pages that are available. And that way, as we added new pages, new entries would be added to our menu automatically. So it could be possible to have this system where we were automatically adding and editing pages without having to modify our source code at all. And I think that's all I wanted to cover for today. So we've gone and created those 2 new controllers with show and index actions, a controller for teachers and students. We looked at n+1 problems and how we can address them using eager loading. That was the .includes. We added a new menu to the application layout. We added a password protected system for adding and editing semi-static pages. And then after that was password protected, we created a way that where the public was able to still access those semi-static pages by permalink. The one, I guess, deficiency that I could see with these semi-static pages right now is that these permalinks are pulling in data. It's going to have to find it by permalink. And so to make that a little bit more efficient from the database point of view, we might want to go and add an index on that column in the database to make looking up those records fast. Now our database table is not very large, so at this point we probably don't have to worry about that very much. And so I guess that's where I'm going to end the video for the day. And the next time we look back at this project, we are going to add a many-to-many association between students and teachers to look at how that is done in Ruby on Rails. All right, thanks for listening. I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.